Welcome to the launch of the European Edtech Funding Report 2024, our fifth edition now of this report. I'm Rhys Spence, Brighteye's Head of Research. A quick word on Brighteye before we begin. So Brighteye, as you'll see, is the joint most active edtech fund in Europe, investing in seed and Series A deals, writing checks of between $250,000 and $5 million. We take a broad view of EdTech, considering anything that helps people learn and grow, from the early years through to lifelong learning and everything in between. And we're increasingly interested in companies that we consider to intersect with EdTech, or in areas of the sector that seem to intersect with the sector, like FinTech, HR tech, health tech, and others. So if you're building something exciting in the world of EdTech or its adjacent areas, please do get in touch because we'd love to hear from you. So on to today's session. The structure of the session will be that we'll walk through some of the key findings. We'll start with global data, then hop to European data, then explore some sub-focuses, including generative AI, as you'd expect, K-12, teacher support tools, climate skills, and workplace productivity. And as we go, we'll stop sharing screen and introduce our fantastic commenters to cover some of the forward-looking elements of the report. And thank you very much to Hege for assisting with that process. Please bear with us as they enter and exit the frame. And for the best experience, we suggest speaker view rather than gallery view, which you can, of course, adjust via the top right corner of your screen. So without further ado, as we have lots to cover, and also I apologize in advance if we run slightly over time, but we will do everything we can to avoid that. I'll start sharing. So let's shift this on. Awesome. So funding boomed between 2020 and 2021, but fell quite drastically in 2022 as part of macro contractions. This continued into 2023, albeit at a slower rate than the 2022 to 23 period. The drop may appear quite stark, but it's consistent with changes in the wider market, as I'm sure you know, including to comparable sectors like health tech and others. Only 87 startups reached unicorn status in 2023, down 89% from 2021's high mark of 782, and the lowest total actually since 2014. The extent of the drop in funding varies significantly by region, as we'll go on to highlight in subsequent slides. And as with last year's data, a positive that can be drawn from this data is that the number of deals remained quite similar. And for reference, this data does not include China, given the evolving regulatory landscape. We believe that an abundance of dry powder in venture and private equity will lead to a resurgent 2024 for global edtech. We've highlighted some of the leading PE funds with an existing edtech interest in this slide. This, of course, doesn't perfectly translate to likelihood of activity in 2024, but it does demonstrate that funding is available for PE funds as possible strategic acquirers and for other involvements in rounds. Breaking EdTech funding down into the regions, funding fell in all regions, but most significantly in India. Europe and the US were both down by a similar amount, so 37% versus 40%. And Europe and the rest of the world saw 2023 levels of investment that exceeded 2020 levels, whilst the US and India lagged significantly behind their 2020 levels. Indeed, the gap between VC investment in Europe and the US, the leading market by investment, narrowed in 2023 to 1 billion from 1.7 billion in 2022 and 6.8 billion, as is pretty clear on this slide, in the huge gulf in 2021. Since 2019, the portion of global edtech deals done in Europe has risen from 21% in 2019 to 32% in 2023. This shows the intensifying edtech activity taking place in Europe relative to other major regions. We interpret this as a sign of health in the European ecosystem, with strong and growing interest in the sector from investors based outside of Europe. There remain few edtech unicorns founded in Europe, but of course we believe it's only a matter of time until a new group of breakout stars burst onto the scene. So let's move on to round sizes. Well, from 2019 to 2021, we observed decreasing numbers of early stage deals and increasing numbers of later stage deals, later stage bigger deals, signaling the increased maturity of the first cohorts of growing edtech companies. We observe a reversal in these trends in 2022 and 23, with a number of smaller early stage deals rising quite significantly and the number of larger later stage deals falling. Indeed, 58% of deals done in 2023 were between 0 and $1 million compared to 48% in 2021. Activity in 2023 reflects a continuation of trends that began in 2021. A decreasing portion of funding in EdTech is being secured in the largest rounds, and so an increasing portion of overall funding is being secured in the smallest. Indeed, the portion of funding secured in rounds over $100 million has reduced to 9% from a high of 67% in 2021. And that reflects both the intensity of activity in the earlier stages and the muted intensity of the later stages. However, this is relatively typical of a post-boom period. And now it's time for our first commenter, Alex Latsis, founding partner at Brighteye. So I'm just going to stop sharing and hopefully you'll be able to see Alex. So Alex, would you like to say a word on your focus at Brighteye?
Yeah, thanks, Reese. So my name is Alex. I'm one of the co-founders of Brighteye. We founded the fund in 2017 to take advantage of what we saw as a massive opportunity, underserved opportunity in Europe to invest in leading edtech companies. My focus at the fund really is for the general management of the fund, but also I focus on Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe, as those are the regions that I'm most frequently in. But I also obviously take a view on the entire ecosystem within Europe as one of the managing partners.
Awesome. And thank you for persisting through a slight loss of throat.
Yeah, the other thing is I've lost my voice, so apologies for that.
We'd love to get your thoughts on what we've seen in the early stage landscape in 23 and perhaps with comparison to previous years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as you correctly said, Reese, it's very typical in a post-boom period for early stage deals to be more prevalent. I think what happens typically, and what was happening in 2020 and 2021, was the COVID crisis had put a lot of wind in the sails of edtech companies and had led to some pretty astronomical growth. And that obviously led to a flurry of activity, a flurry of interest, a flurry of investment, and deals became very competitive, and so valuations were driven up way past, I think, reasonable levels. Us being quite conservative, thankfully we weren't subject to investing at those highs, and so we haven't taken very large haircuts to many of our companies that grew throughout that period. But the vast majority of investors, especially late stage investors who were investing at those highs, had significant haircuts to their portfolios in general, in tech in general, but also in some cases to edtech. Although it's worth mentioning that edtech has been one of the most resilient sectors in the tech downturn. Obviously, faced with the notion that they might repeat the same mistakes, it's a lot easier and a lot more conservative to invest at an earlier stage. There's a lot less risk involved, and obviously there's a lot more potential for upside. There's a lot of data and lots of studies to suggest that smaller funds, but also earlier stage funding leads to better outcomes overall, with funds around 100 million outperforming larger growth funds and funds that do later stage deals. So that's the other thing, of course, is that the earlier stage funds who are more experienced in investing feel a lot more comfortable with the risk appetite and are more happy to continue with much of the same. Whereas the growth investors, unfortunately, who are extremely critical and crucial for the ecosystem, are playing a more conservative role. And so they're also tending to invest a little bit earlier and look at earlier opportunities, which explains why so much of the funding is going to the sub 40 million range in terms of the most recent rounds. Obviously, we anticipate that things will return to normal, hopefully not to the highs of 2020 and 2021, which I think were always a little bit unsustainable, but to the period just preceding that, where it was the macro trends in edtech that were driving the increase in valuation, increase in interest, and increase in investment. Because edtech is a very resilient area for investment, and ultimately is very much underserved by capital, and that remains the case today. So long term, it's the right place to invest if you want long-term gains.
Awesome. And if we had to push you on a prediction for 2024, what might that be?
I know that Ariane is going to be very pleased with what I'm about to say. I think that green skills acquisition and green skills are a massive pinch point for societies, especially OECD countries who've made certain commitments to conduct energy transition imperatives locally, and also regionally and within larger groupings like the European Union. There is a massive paucity of skilled professionals to accompany us in this transition. And so I think that any company that addresses the green skills issue is going to see increased interest, and I think and also interest in terms of funding, but also take up from clients and customers, because these are urgent needs and they need to be addressed.
That was perfect. Thank you very much. And we'll all be hearing from Ariane, who Alex referred to later in the session. So thank you very much, Alex. We look forward to seeing if you're right. So just bringing the slides back now. So we observed a broad range of clusters represented in the top 10 largest deals, with particular focuses on curriculum development, mentorship, and new modes of delivering employee training as flexibly and compactly as possible. The dominance of US-based companies in the top 10 is clear, represents the continuation of a trend we first observed in 2021. It's worth also pointing out that the largest deals are considerably smaller than in previous years, with only 3 deals this year, or 2023, sorry, exceeding 100 million. Hence why 2023 can't really be considered representative and a predictor of activity in future years. So on to exits now. So at the end of 2022, we predicted that 2023 would be a year of consolidation. Despite the broader narrative of fewer exits in 2023 than in previous years, some meaningful consolidation did take place across the sector. With an expansive definition of EdTech, we observe a range of deals, and including a couple of examples on there. There's, of course, Parchment's exit to Instructure, Dreambox Learning's exit to Discovery, and one that's not mentioned but we cover in the report is Kahoot's exit to Goldman Sachs, or privatization to Goldman Sachs, and a number of other companies as part of that deal. Most notable exits were to strategic acquirers, including deals not mentioned in the tables, such as Go1's acquisition of Blinkist, announced in May 2023. Now, we would like to welcome Felipe Sommer now to share a few remarks. He's co-founder of Nearpod that exited to Renaissance for 650 million in 2021. So I'll stop sharing again, and hopefully you'll all see. Oh, sorry. There you go. See Felipe. So Felipe, thank you very much for joining us. Would you like to say a word on your work at Nearpod and what you're currently working on before we start?
Yes, hi everybody. Nice to be here. So at Nearpod, the work at Nearpod was all over the place, from discovering a new technology to deciding that there was an opportunity in education to disrupt the market. At the time, there was devices, internet, and digital books going into schools, and we had a technology that we thought could play a significant role in improving learning outcomes, and decided to give away in a freemium model a tool to teachers. And as we evolved through the funding journey, we sort of changed our focus from teachers to schools to districts to states. So it was a pretty interesting journey. And I think we successfully exited the business 3 years ago now. It's going to be in March, 3 years. I'm not doing much these days. I'm doing a little bit of consulting. I'm in a few boards. I'm an advisor to a couple of funds. But I'm trying to think what I want to do next. And I think there was a good coincidence of sort of the low years in funding and what's been going on in the last couple of years with my personal situation. So we'll see what happens.
Awesome.
Not much these days. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of ideas, but I don't know that I have the energy to start all over again yet.
Well, you certainly earned the break. And as a founder with a successful exit under your belt, we'd love to hear about how your exit intentions evolved as the company progressed, and I guess how you'd considered the kind of exit that you might like when you first started creating the company.
Well, when we realized that the use case that we're pushing was really meaningful, as we evolved, we realized that that our technology had to be part of a larger play. So we thought for years that we should sort of evolve into a much larger company. The question, and this is very personal, as we talked last week, then there are personal matters, right? We didn't feel at the time that we had the energy to take the company public or start acquiring many companies and create a conglomerate. So that's when we, together with our investors, looked for an exit of a larger player, strategic one, which ended up being Renaissance. So we didn't know we were going to sell to Renaissance, but we wanted to find a larger home for the company we had, because we thought it was going to be more successful being part of a larger play.
Awesome. And how do you think you would have approached an exit in the current conditions, part A, and part B? Would you roll that into a prediction on exits for 2024?
Well, I mean, what I would, in a current situation, I don't know that. I mean, the exit world, it's divided into, okay, you have an inbound, and if you have an inbound, this whole scenario, and if you don't have an inbound, I mean, just looking for an exit in the environment in the last couple of years, I mean, I don't know what would have done. Probably I would have sort of reduced cost a little bit and focus on surviving until sort of the money shows up again, which is, I don't know if it's a prediction. I clearly don't know what's going to happen, but it seems that all of these, the industry and capital markets have cycles, right? So it seems that there's going to be a new flow of money coming into the industry. Probably, I mean, I heard by the end of this year. I mean, the political climate and the geopolitical issues going on in the world might play a role, but I mean, who knows, right? But at some point, the funding will come back and exits will sort of start being prominent again. I think that it's very important for companies, if they have a successful use case that actually works, which was our case, is to be able to survive, which is sort of human nature, right? You try to survive, and then when you can start growing again, you do that. But I mean, I don't know if that's a prediction, but that's what I would have done, and what I think is going to happen.
Awesome. I'm sure a lot of people in the room are also hoping that the money comes back in the next. It
will. It will. The question is, can you survive or not? But it will at some point.
Yeah. Well, that was fascinating. Thank you very much, Felipe. We're gonna dive into a European section now, starting with funding. So European EdTech was one of the more resilient regions in 2023, as we mentioned, particularly compared to 2022. And the sector secured 1.2 billion in 23, representing a 37% drop in 2022 levels. While that is quite a significant drop, the funding amount remains higher than 2020. which of course bodes well for the sector given the hype and heightening interest in 2020 as the pandemic took hold. The number of EdTech deals in Europe shows more resilience in the market, rising from 256 deals in 22 to 288 in 23, which is somewhat surprising in the challenging context, but it does show that EdTech appetite remains strong and the pipeline of exciting, well-funded companies continues to expand. Though the amount of European EdTech funding fell, as we just mentioned, the half-year data looks more positive. So the European Edtech ecosystem secured its second consecutive increase in VC funding, rising from 400 million in half two 22 to 500 million in half one 23, and again to 700 million in half two 23. It can hardly be described as a huge jumpstart, but it does signal the presence of some green shoots that we may see continue to grow in half one 24 and beyond. For the fourth year running, Brighteye Ventures was the most active investor in Europe, with 5 deals in 2023. However, Brighteye does share this honor with Educapital and Ada Ventures. 5 of the top 10 investors were EdTech specialists, providing a point of similarity with the global figures. And the set of active investors, as reflected again in the macro figures, tend to be focused on early stage deals. It's worth pointing out, as the headline of this slide suggests, that there is increasing involvement from government-aligned funders, most notably in Italy, in Spain, Wales, and in France, which isn't currently included in this data. And it might go some way to explain the strong resilience in the earliest stages. The UK retained top spot in 2023 in terms of both funding and deal numbers. UK startups secured almost 3 times the number secured in the second place market, which is France. France returned to second in terms of both funding and deal count, and the gap between France in second and Germany in third was relatively narrow at 51 million. Intriguingly, EdTech investment in France actually rose in 2023 relative to 2022, and it was the only market to do so. Now on to our first sub-focus. So when large language models by OpenAI and others were first published, early adopters were able to create an extraordinary divide between their products and those of later adopters. However, as time has passed, that divide has narrowed. Indeed, some of the most exciting companies in EdTech are built on top of OpenAI's API and others. For example, Magic School AI, To Teach, and Curipod. Tech companies will increasingly compete on the basis of access to proprietary data, differentiated functionality, UX, UI, distribution, IP, and the business models that they build around AI rather than on automated intelligence that's increasingly available and incorporated throughout. As part of our work, we compiled 10 examples of EdTech companies building with AI. We also assembled our 5 buckets of Gen AI products on the right-hand side, explained in a little more detail in the report. In brief, the categories are knowledge discovery and synthesis, so Gen AI being used in search, but maintaining the prospect of advancing discovery processes. The second one is educational content creation. That one's kind of clear. AI tutors and co-pilots, so Gen AI being used for creating learning and problem paths for students. Companies like Synaptic, which is a Brighteye company, Camigo, and Elo are examples of companies in that space. The fourth is skill assessment and placement, so Gen AI being used for personalizing aptitude assessments, and then administrative efficiency, which again is very, very broad, but also very meaningful. Now, we are delighted to be joined by Libby Hills, co-leader of the Learning School portfolio at the Jacobs Foundation. So I'll stop sharing screen again and welcome Libby. So Libby, would you like to say a word on your work at Jacobs?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me, Reese. It's great to be here today. So I'm here from the Jacobs Foundation. So we're a Swiss family foundation. We're an impact investor in the K-12 EdTech space. We're a proud LP in Brighteye Fund 2 and also 8 other EdTech specialist funds. We also fund a lot of learning science research and EdTech research in the space, which sits within a portfolio of work that I lead at the foundation. My background's in education and EdTech research myself, and I continue to be involved in research, looking at applications of AI to education. I also host a podcast called EdTechnical about the topic as well.
Awesome. So definitely one of the top people to talk to about this exact subject. So you, of course, as you just mentioned, combine a focus at Jacobs with your own AI research projects. Which of those projects particularly stand out to you as holding promise that we might see in 2024 or perhaps further ahead?
So one of the areas of research that I work on and that I'm really excited about relates to assessment, like K-12 assessment. So I was really excited to see this as like an opportunity area, I think, highlighted in your broader report. And some of the research that I'm doing is specifically looking at how to use large language models and speech models to support formative assessment. So low stakes kind of classroom level assessment of learning in the K-12 space. There's historically been a lot of work around, automation of assessment using AI, but historically that's really focused on multiple choice questions. Now in K-12, asking open-ended questions is really insightful from a learning perspective, but also really hard to automate the assessment of those answers. And so some of the work that I'm involved in is looking at how accurate, how good are large language models and speech models at doing some of the lower stakes, simpler types of assessment tasks that are really insightful from a learning perspective, and also much more technically feasible to do than some of the more complex summative types of assessment tasks like marking whole essays, for example, which is both technically complex and also sort of has some ethical issues associated with it as well. And so what this research points to is really a lot of promise for large language models with minimal prompt engineering, minimal additional training to be able to accurately assess these types of simple open-ended responses, and also for the speech models to be able to accurately assess oral reading fluency. Don't want to get too technical, but a really key aspect of how we assess and understand how well students are developing their literacy skills. So I think this is really exciting for me because this is a unique capability of some of this, cutting edge technology that really has the potential to unlock some new areas of challenge for teachers and schools that, tech tools today have struggled to do. So for me, I'm particularly excited about assessment and what we're going to see in the kind of coming years with what large language models and speech models can really do here. I'm going to squeeze in a second quick one, Reese, as well, if I may. I know we're tight on time, but this isn't an area of research, but it's something that we're funding at the foundation that I just want to highlight that might be of interest to some people on the call. I think there's some really interesting new mechanisms that are kind of popping up at the moment to really facilitate innovation and quick experimentation in the space, which is great to see. One of the things that we're supporting is called the Learning Tools Competition. It's not open at the moment, but will open later this year, and it provides awards for edtech companies, innovating in the space from sort of 50k up to 250k, sort of the prize amounts. So I think just people should keep an eye out for that this year because it's a really great way to get some support and recognition for people who are doing some, experimentation in this space.
Fantastic, and an awesome plug for a great opportunity as well. And if you were to have only one prediction for 2024, what might it be?
Yeah, I think I've got the short straw having to make predictions around generative AI. But what I would say is that I think we're going to move away from seeing this technology as a Swiss Army knife, so something that's going to solve kind of all of education's problems, and be a bit more clear-eyed about what the specific capabilities of this technology is good at doing, and align our expectations and how we're assessing the performance of these types of tools with the use cases that they're well suited to be helping with, like formative assessment, for example, helping teachers with their kind of blank page problems and getting started on things like developing resources and lesson plans, but not, hey, now we don't need teachers anymore type dialogue. So I'm really excited to see that kind of progress in how we're thinking about where these technologies might be useful in education.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Libby. And as if by magic, our second sub-focus for the report is in K-12 and specifically on teacher support tools. We formed this market map of teacher support tools late last year. We formed 4 main observations. The first one was that assessment and feedback has historically been the most crowded space, featuring early, well-known winners like Kahoot, but it's also the smallest when it comes to market size. The second observation, that new tools utilizing AI to support with lesson planning tend to be content focused, and they're building these tools on top of formerly mostly static content. The third observation is the admin and comms and organization companies are fragmented with long-standing incumbents, upcoming startups expanding across Europe and building all-in-one solutions. And then the fourth observation is that B2C or B2B models vary by category. So most solutions in the admin, comms, and org buckets follow B2B models, while teacher tools relating to design and delivery tend to be mainly B2C. We have a lot of reasons for believing in this space from both a commercial and impact perspective. Almost all countries in Europe are facing significant teacher shortages. For example, there's a huge shortfall of 25,000 teachers in Germany by 2025 and 30,000 in Portugal by 2030. And research has shown that across the OECD countries, teachers on average spend about half of their weekly time teaching and the other half on non-teaching related activities, which equates to about 17 hours per week. We set out some of the opportunities on the slide, including lesson planning, delivering homework tools, and the assessment engine for the next generation, and a couple of others, which you can explore in more detail on the report. We took a look at some of the largest deals for companies serving K-12 age children. Looking at these deals, we can make a couple of observations again. Tutoring can be quite replicable. There's likely to be one or a couple of winners in each market. The second is that substitute teaching is a market we really like with reliable demand. And again, it's likely to be, the solutions that we're seeing around Europe at the moment, we really hope will be expanding across the world and benefiting a lot of teachers and a lot of students, and saving a lot of stress for the people that are in charge of finding those replacements. And then the third one is curriculum planning. That is certainly something that we expect to be unlocked by AI. Our key themes listed on the left tend to align quite closely with the buckets we described in the Gen AI categories that were on a previous slide before we spoke with Libby. So we won't dwell on them too much now. And instead, we'd much rather hear from Jenny Coogan. So we're delighted to be joined by Jenny, one of the co-founders at Newsella and a wonderful Brighteye mentor as well. So welcome, Jenny. We'd love to hear your thoughts, but firstly, perhaps a quick word on Newsella and your current work.
Yeah, thank you. Greetings from Boston, Massachusetts, by the way. We're on the other side of the ocean. I joined Newsella way back in 2013, kind of on the heels of a sea change that we were seeing in US K-12, where we were getting a new set of reading standards. And so that was really like the opportunity that we jumped on. And I was responsible for developing all of the content that powered the platform. I just recently stepped away, so I should be calling up Felipe to see what great ideas he's got. Maybe I could help him with one of those. But yeah, just enjoying stepping back for a little while and observing what's happening in EdTech writ large.
Nice. And Newsella, it reached an enormous scale, supporting 37 million K-12 students and 2.5 million teachers. What is the direction of travel most exciting to you in K-12 at the moment?
K-12, at least here in the US, is still pretty turbulent. It's surprising to me, like how long the impact of the pandemic school closures is like still reverberating. For anyone who's trying to sell to schools, it's a tough time because there's funding sources that are kind of coming to an end. There are, like you said, teacher shortages are just as much a problem here too. So, putting aside any concerns about what tech you're using, you're just trying to find adequate teachers for the classes that you have. And then another interesting thing happening here is the reading wars have finally ended, and it's determined that there is like this one approach to reading that is far superior, and a lot of states and major school districts are finding that they were using the wrong approach, so they're having to swap out curriculum, which can use up funds that they may have used for other things. Another, interesting trend too is school absenteeism. I think that's like one of the biggest problems facing administrators right now. I think it ties into that well-being and inclusivity theme that you had there. There's still a lot of post-pandemic mental challenges, maturity challenges with students. So, just keeping, in addition to making sure they've got enough teachers, they've also got to find ways to diagnose school absenteeism and prevent it.
Yeah, there's scope for a lot of optimism, but a lot of things need solving. And
Yeah,
I guess
there's a lot of great problems.
yeah, and speaking of which, if you were, you're obviously not looking to necessarily start something else now, but perhaps something in the future. Which sort of parts of the sector would you be looking at? Would it be one of those you've just highlighted or something else?
Um, I really liked Libby's comments about AI and how we're now kind of settling down a little bit and realizing that AI is not the panacea for all educational woes, but that in very targeted ways, it could be quite helpful. And something I've not seen yet, but I think has a lot of potential is using generative AI to allow teachers to create a lot more content targeted to parents. My own kids brought home their report cards, and I got maybe a one sentence response from their teachers about how they were doing over an entire trimester. And, I think any parent is hungry for communications that are tailored about their kids specifically. And yet it's the kind of thing that probably ranks last on a teacher's list of to-dos, is like giving out descriptive, dedicated communications to parents, just helping them see, the way we saw during the pandemic, what's actually happening in the school day, what's happening with my kid. And I just think that's such a low stakes, only upside way to channel this technology. You're not worrying about plagiarism. You're not worrying about so much about, originality or accuracy. And I think it could be a way to bring parents more into the school community, which could then help with that absenteeism issue that we're facing as well.
Mm. Well, fantastic advice or pointers for any aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience or those working on something similar. And, not to sort of go over it again, but what kind of prediction would you be putting out there for 2024? It's always hard, actually, because you think, when we're writing the predictions, we always think, this grand thing's going to happen in the space of 12 months. And of course, it never happens in 12 months. It's always more like 36. But if you were to look at this 12
they're fun
months,
to do anyway. So
yeah.
My prediction is not so much like a K-12 specific one, but more of like higher ed. Over here, we are seeing like a real, the debate around college is really coming to a boiling point. I think a lot of American families are just losing faith in the idea of 4-year private liberal arts, college, $60,000 at 7% interest rates, to, spit you out to a job that may be replaced by AI. So I think my prediction is that we might be looking more towards Europe and places like Germany and Switzerland, where there was a long-standing model of apprenticeship and technical education, like really focusing on CTE in a way that might be more future-proof. So I think companies that can serve that can provide a platform for that kind of learning might have a great opportunity over in the US market.
That is very interesting. We've certainly seen a number of companies that are looking to address that kind of problem, and there are a couple that are quite advanced. But clearly, if they're not making inroads into the US yet, if it's certainly one of your predictions for this year. So thank you very much for those comments, Jenny. That was really, really interesting.
Oh, you're welcome.
And our third sub-focus is quite a big jump. So from K-12 to climate skills or sustainability skills, as we like to call them. So when we started to think about the EdTech link with climate skills or sustainability skills, we decided to form a market map that you can see on screen. We've of course done a full write-up, but our key observations are the following. So there's a growing category of companies looking to combine upskilling with job placement. The upskilling and reskilling market for site-based workers is largely dominated by legacy companies, so AKA it's ripe for disruption. The third, so many green-collar jobs are currently perceived as unattractive, contributing to the skills gap. And the fourth is that employees are really increasingly keen to work for sustainable companies and in more sustainable roles where they feel like they are having a positive impact. So the challenge is, of course, enormous. As the stat from the ILO shows on screen, they've estimated that by 2030, the green economy would create 24 million jobs worldwide, with climate tech playing a vital role in that growth. With this in mind, we also took a look at the data on the fastest growing green skills by demand, and we lent on LinkedIn research here. Data from LinkedIn and others demonstrates the need to train new entrants to the labour market, as well as incumbent participants in climate skills, in order to meet the high and growing demand and address inadequate supply. Demand for climate skills is clearly here to stay, and the education system has certainly not caught up yet. So the private sector has stepped in, capitalizing on the enormous potential, but also fulfilling an urgent need in the jobs market. And there are few people better to talk to about this than Ariane Camon from La Salive, a brilliant Brighteye portfolio company operating in this space. So welcome, Ariane. We'd love to hear a bit more about your work at La Salive.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tris. So basically, in a few words, what we do at La Solive is we train people for energy renovation of buildings jobs. And just to give you some perspective, in France only there is a gap of 250,000 skilled workers in this field. So we operate a hire, train, and deploy model where we source people who are in transition. We match them with companies, our partner companies mainly, and they are pre-hired, and then they undertake a 3-month boot camp. They get a state certification because we also create certification, and then they can start a new job. And basically, we have trained we have trained 500 people in 2 years, and we aim at training several thousands of people across France next year. So yeah, basically about, just to keep it short.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you. And when we were talking before the session about what it'd be good to cover, we spoke about the involvement of government. And so it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective on the outlook for government involvement in climate skills training and placement, and how you feel about attempts that have been made so far, and which kind of direction you'd like them to take.
Well, first of all, I think that, the good news is that most governments have realized that the main bottleneck today to meet their climate objectives is actually the skill gap and the lack of really skilled workers. And I think when I thought about it, when you asked the questions, and I think there are 4 main types of government involvement. I think the first is really to define the priorities, produce studies, market studies that really forecast what type of workers and what type of skills are needed, because it's very different to you have jobs, new jobs that are created, and you have existing jobs that are just evolving and that requires new skills. From my understanding of all the studies I have read, to react on the slide you just showed, it's actually, well, if you extract the data from LinkedIn, you're mainly going to spot, I think, I will say like skilled or office type of works, because it's where you can find office workers, but the huge part of people, the huge numbers of people who are needed are actually frontline workers, and you can count them in millions worldwide that are needed to really operate the transition. Second thing that government can do, I think, is really to promote these jobs. You've said it, but it's jobs that generally most of them suffer from a bad image, and you need to change that if you want to attract massively people towards these jobs. Third thing that governments can do, I think, is to subsidize somehow or make create incentives for upskilling or reskilling programs. And I'll give you some example if you're interested on how it's done in France. And the fourth thing and the last thing is really to help companies recruit new workers. And it's different to help people reskill and upskill and to help companies make their recruitment. So I don't know if you want me to develop on what I can see, what I know the most, because we're based in France today, and what I see happening with the French government today and in the coming years. If I take these four axes, first, you have a lot of studies at the moment. It's one of these studies that actually have identified that we miss 250,000 people in energy renovation. What is getting more and more interesting is studies that actually are now identifying exactly how many heat pump installers we need, how many solar panel installers we need, but also how many energy advisors, etc., etc. And this is really super useful for people and structures like us to really direct our efforts towards the most important needs. Second,
which
yeah.
which organizations did you say are making those estimations?
In France, we have a structure that is called France Stratégie, which is actually a service of the Prime Minister. And it's actually directly the services of the Prime Minister, showing that it's a big of their focus that has produced these studies. And one of these studies have just been released, and it's super interesting. It's really on top of the priorities of this government, and it's quite interesting. The second thing on the job promotion, which I think is where we need to governments will have to focus a lot more in the coming years. In France, if I take the example of energy renovation, the French government has financed already some campaigns, for example, a campaign on TikTok to show to young people that it's not because today people think that jobs in construction are jobs where you get dirty and it's not fun and it's not the job that you dream about. And the campaign was aimed at showing that not only you can have a huge impact, but you do something super useful and you really contribute to climate transition. So I think we need to invest a lot more on these campaigns and communication campaigns on these jobs. And yeah, we do a lot of lobbying to try and raise awareness also at our level on how interesting these jobs are. Third, I think on how government can commit to help people reskill and upskill. You have a model that I think is interesting and that is just emerging at the moment in France, and is promoted actually by our Minister of Economy and Finance, which is a model where if the unemployed person or a person in transition invest their own money, a part of their own money in their reskilling training, then the government can top up and help them complete and finance the program. And it's only focused on climate jobs. And it's experimented at the moment, but I think it's very promising because you align the commitment of the person who is transitioning, and you help them really orient towards useful jobs. So I think that's something that I expect to grow more and more in the coming years. And maybe the fourth thing is how you help companies recruit. And I was listening to what you said before about the model of apprenticeship in Germany. It also exists, but not as developed in France, and it's getting more and more the general case. And what we do today is that we have apprenticeship contracts where the company recruits a worker, they pay the training program, and they get a partial refund from their branch. I'm not going to enter into how complex all this is, but they get at the level of their branch, there are funding that they mutualize, and that is directed to recruitment of new workers for the most needed jobs. And I think this is really interesting because yeah, it helps really companies make their recruitment, and you finance training programs with a job at the end, and and you're absolutely sure that there will be a job at the end. And again, what I hear here is that there will be a lot more of that in the coming years.
That was a fantastic overview. Thank you very much. And also, it sounds like there's actually quite a lot of positive government involvement in that area of skills development, which is obviously fantastic. And it seems like there is an increasing openness to sharing best practice in this kind of thing. I can certainly sort of, I know in the UK, the way that we sort of predict skills shortages is not particularly developed, and our at Brighteye go-to resources tend to be European Commission or things that are done by the French government. So yeah, it's interesting that that sort of pool of resources is getting better. So thank you very much, Ariane, for those comments. I'm going to return to the fourth and final subsector now, which is workplace productivity, and I'm very grateful to Roxana for being able to join us shortly from Commercials. So we formed a new market map for this report focused on the theme, and our key observations are that basically there's rising prominence of skills mapping and broader talent management solutions designed to help companies make the most of in-house talent and foster internal growth and progression. As highlighted earlier in the Gen AI slides, there's increasing prominence of solutions focused on helping organizations manage internal and external knowledge. And there's also increasingly intense competition in the internal learning solution space. And of course, we've highlighted 3 areas that we consider EdTech and would of course be very interested in. So if you're working on one of those areas, please do reach out to us. As with the other areas, we did compile the biggest deals in the space. It's clear that VCs are seeing considerable growth in the mentoring and career guidance space. As access to knowledge improves and the breadth of tools used by companies broadens, we're expecting an emphasis on how companies manage their knowledge management to sort of evolve and become more sophisticated. And then the third thing is, with improved access to training and that knowledge, we expect a significant and growing emphasis on internal improvement. You can explore this in more detail in the report, but we're going to go to Roxana now. We're delighted that Roxana is joining us from Commercials. She's Chief People Officer and has also been Chief People Officer at Labster. So a perfect person to be talking with us here. So I'm going to stop here and say hello to Roxana. So Roxana, we'd love to have a word from you on your work at Commercials, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the attention span. I will try to keep it as spicy and interesting and short. My 30 seconds elevator pitch. First, greetings from Spain, where, as you can see, it's cold today. I fell in love with EdTech while I was Chief People Officer at Labster, a Danish company with quite an interesting and solid European and US global setup. I'm working now with commerce tools, trying to disrupt e-commerce while still feeding my passion in EdTech. There are 2 sides of the story, right? So I can discuss from a people leader perspective, what I can see in the workplace, but also from a consumer of corporate learning in general.
Awesome. So yeah, you've worked as a Chief People Officer at a number of impressive, well-funded businesses in varied sectors, and in that position, you'll have seen the great, the good, and possibly some of the ugly products focused on workforce productivity and building effective teams. One of our questions to you is: in which parts of your team's role is software and other tech products making the biggest difference to the performance of your team?
I definitely have a blacklist of software I would not recommend. Yet from a productivity perspective, it's so interesting because as you pointed out, everyone pointed out very clearly today, it's not about accelerated growth anymore in the last couple of months and a year. It's more focus on the path to profitability, right? So cost optimization, automation, productivity in terms of annual recurrent revenue per employee, all those KPIs are starting to become more and more important. And when I'm looking at productivity, just in a hindsight, in Commerce Tools, we have right now around 700 employees, and we are working with 37 different countries. So we hire in 37 different countries. This means chaos. And without proper software, we will not be able to support from a performance perspective. So people operations first, making sure that, everything, we automate basically everything. And the Jira is making a pretty big hit in here, us trying to keep it tight with our metrics, at the same time, performance management. So if you would ask me today, what is that one software where I would put half of my budget if that software would actually do the trick that we needed, that would be performance management and career development. I don't think we are yet at that stage where we are saying that from an agile perspective, holistic perspective, we have a tool that satisfies fully our productivity from that side.
Fascinating. And are there other areas where you consider the tools currently on the market as being suboptimal? I.e., are there areas where aspiring edtech entrepreneurs or current edtech entrepreneurs should be focusing their time if they want to work with you?
Funnily enough, like in all the chief people officer networks, we are discussing about the new trend. And the new trend, like there are two basically. The one is the returning to office, so future of work, which is the paranoia of the moment. The second one is about SBO, right? Like skill-based organizations. And we see that the trust that the employees are having in the business is going down. We also see that number one reason why people are leaving is because it's not clear for them. It's not transparent, the career path and the career development. And how can we support them in keeping that agile focus? We continue saying like, everyone should own their career, which is true until a point, right? To be in the seat of your own development. Yet we have a duty. We need to empower. We need to, make sure that we are supporting in this journey. We are coaching, we are mentoring. So back to your question, I believe that anyone would be able to support us in this agile skill set database that we can merge with the career development and the development advancement paths. That will be the winning lottery in the upcoming years.
Awesome. And does that count as your prediction for 2024, or would you like to say one final prediction for us before we close out?
I would like to double down on the leadership development here, because I see that as a huge trend. And I know we are going back to the basic, yet good people leaders are scarce skill at this point in time. So doubling down on leadership. Thank you.
That's awesome. So thank you very much all for joining us. It's a fairly abrupt end. We overran. I'm sorry. I hope it was interesting. Thank you very much to Alex, to Felipe, to Libby, to Ariane, to Roxana, and to Jenny, of course, for those fantastic contributions. And just to flag, the next thing up on our research agenda is the second Anonymous Exits edition, where we interview an exited founder and we hear about the process of getting the deal. So it's kind of an interesting inside scoop on that experience. So thanks again for joining, and the recording and other things will be available, and hope you enjoy reading the report. So thanks a lot.